Hi, Dr. H here again with Family-Centered Parenting. Today I want to talk about something that triggered some thoughts when I saw this in the news. Apparently, right now, 33% or one-third of adults between the ages of 18 and 34 are living at home with their parents. And apparently this is the highest number since 1940. Wow. Now, what is that about, and what do we have to think about that, and how do we respond to that? Well, let me think about two different scenarios about an adult child. One of them is my child is now an adult and hasn't left home. So that's one scenario. Maybe they, after high school, went to a local community college or took on a job and just decided to remain home and hasn't left the nest. The other is the adult child returning home. And we've heard of that quite a bit. Child graduates college or lost a job and can't afford to pay rent at the moment and live on their own, and they contact their parents and say, could they come back home? So there are similarities because they're, again, legally adults coming back home, but because circumstances are different, we have to handle them differently, and in certain respects we have to handle them in a similar manner. So let me start with the similarities. The one is rules and boundaries. You're never going to get along in a household, whether it's with young children or adult children, if there aren't rules and boundaries. The difference is when they're adults, negotiating those rules and boundaries is a far different process. It's no longer, I'm the mom, I'm the boss, I pay the rent, do what I say. That just doesn't go over well with most kids, especially from teenagers on up, and certainly does not go well with adult children. So we need to be proactive and to even reduce it to a contract about what I call the 3 R's in a family. 3 R's are rules, roles, and responsibilities. Rules are the rules of the household that are negotiated between the adult child and the parent. Now, this is regardless of whether it's a child returning home to what had been an empty nest or a child who hasn't left home. When they're adult, we have to say they're no longer children. So even if we've had rules for the child who remained home, those rules need to be renegotiated because of they're now grown up and adult, and you have different expectations. So those roles. What is our role? Who is going to determine what's for breakfast? Who's going to cook? And that roles and responsibilities get tied in. Not only who's going to be in charge, take care of certain chores in the house, and the responsibilities that we have to each other. So remember those 3 R's, rules, roles, and responsibilities. And as best we can, we need to be proactive. Now, what makes these things work or makes them troublesome, frankly, is the quality of the relationship between the parent and child often determines how much work it will take to make the situation harmonious. If you've had good communication, if there's a good rapport between the parent and the adult child through growing up, and even if they've left the nest and you keep in touch and you know what's going on in their lives and it's a healthy relationship, then if they come back home, it becomes a lot easier to manage. If there's been any kind of conflict or estrangement, that means both parties have to work harder as best we can proactively before the situation to make sure we're on the same page. Now, if the child is at home and hasn't left, then it becomes proactively is a little trickier. It just means being mindful and sitting down and say, you know what? You're now 19 years old. You're just finishing maybe a 2-year college. You're still at home. Let's sit down and let's say what's going on in this home, and let's reestablish our expectations, our 3 R's, our rules, roles, and responsibilities. The other thing to remember is effective communication. And again, I'll go back to the rule that I just mentioned in a previous video about 7 steps. Seek to understand before being understood. It's so important that there's honesty in our communication with an adult child. We're not going to get away with shortcuts. And we really have to make sure that we chisel down a little bit and figure out what's really going on. And sometimes what's expressed on the surface is not quite what's going on. So, for example, an adult child might be returning home and say, well, my job wasn't working out. I decided it's time to move on to something else, but I have nothing on the horizon right now. Well, if you take that at face value, maybe you need to drill down a little bit and say, so let me understand what happened in your previous job that led you to the feeling that this was not right for you. And with that level of understanding, you might find out that there are other things going on. There might have been an interpersonal conflict. They might have been let go from their job and don't want to really own up to the fact that they were fired or laid off because of some other reason, either their malfeasance or something going on in the company or something unethical that was going on in the company and they couldn't live with. So by being a good listener, by having really effective communication, we can get to the bottom of what's going on and coming up with a strategy for going forward. And again, the old tool, validate, make sure you've heard, your understanding of your adult child before you voice your point of view and your concerns. That means you can have a much more honest dialogue, and it's going to be so important to move on and come up with the 3 R's, the rules, responsibilities, and roles between us. Now, we need despite whether it's an adult child returning to the home or the child who hasn't left, it's important to have clearly defined goals of an exit strategy. Now, sometimes there's no exit strategy. Sometimes it might be a multi-generational household that meets everybody's needs, and you really don't need to negotiate an exit strategy. That happens depending upon the culture, how people view the authority of a more older folk, a grandparent, a parent, maybe their child care responsibilities that can be taken on by certain members of the family. And there are very harmonious, happy, multi-generational families. But if it's not a multi-generational point of view, then is there going to be an exit strategy? Certainly, let's think of an empty nester family. The children have gone off to work or college or whatever. They now have readjusted to being just the couple, let's say a husband and wife without their children at home. They've made changes. They might have moved from the family home and say, why do we need a home with a 4-bedroom home with two extra bedrooms for kids when our kids don't live here anymore? And they might have downsized to a townhouse with maybe a spare room or 1 spare room, where a child coming home is now much more intrusive than they have in the past. They've adjusted their lifestyle to not having another person in the home. And now, for whatever reason, their daughter or son has let them know they need to come home for a while. Well, we all make sacrifices for our children at times, and it's a challenge. But what's helpful is that we sit down with the child and say, okay, this is temporary. What do we need to do? How long do you think you can be here? What efforts are you going to make to get another job or figure out a way to live that's affordable for you? Let's talk about it. We'll be supportive, but let's have some milestones and goals that we could look forward and have some markers. And we might be able to meet those goals, but at least we can talk about them. And if it's the child who's remaining at home, it's also important to say, well, Jasmine, you've reached an age where I know you want to be independent and out from the scrutiny of parents. How can we plan to make that happen? What has to happen before you're ready to be out on your own? So the circumstances of how they've left the home or are remaining in the home will be important. And sometimes a child returning home might have some emotional or mental health concerns that need to be addressed. Again, honest communication. People don't admit easily. Maybe it's an anxiety disorder or depression that's made them look for a change in lifestyle. You need, as a parent, to be aware of that and hear it so that if they have an issue, you can address it. The last thing you want is your adult child to move back home, lock themselves off in a spare room, and just say, leave me alone, I'll work it out. And then you're worried and not sure what's going on because you haven't been able to have that honest dialogue and figure out maybe there is a mental health concern. Maybe you have to figure out how to get counseling and therapy for your child and figure out how to get them on the right path to recovery rather than just kind of sitting back and worrying. So be aware of their situation and how to respond. And in the long run, we can make it work. We can renegotiate our relationship with an adult child. There becomes a certain rapport and sharing. We need, as adults, to be more vulnerable with our adult children and get off that pedestal. And that leads to a more honest give and take with your child. When they see your vulnerability, they're much more likely to admit to their vulnerability. So those are some of the issues with apparently a fairly modern concern about adult children remaining at home. And as parents and as grandparents, we need to be aware of some shifts in what we need to do and the skill set and tools we need to be able to respond to that. And if we talk about tool building, I'll give a plug for my book. Let me hold it up the right way. Family-Centered Parenting, your guide to growing great families. And it's available on my website, familycenteredparenting.com, and also on Amazon. So with that in mind, I'll say goodbye till the next video. I've enjoyed talking to you and hope to see you again. Take care.